Well, hello fellow crafters, Janine here, and today I'm going to be showing you how I watercolored this fall leaf background. And if you come back in a couple of weeks, I'm going to show you what I end up doing with this background. But if you would like to see how to watercolor stamped leaves and to make a background out of them, then just stay tuned. Okay, the supplies that I'm using today are going to be the Fabriano Studio watercolor paper. It's 140 pound hot press paper. It's good for stamping, not necessarily good for really wet washes, but you know, we're going to work with it today. We're going to make it work. But it's a 25% cotton. It's a really affordable watercolor paper. Particularly if you're a stamper, that's what this hot press water paper is good for. So we're going to be using that. I'm going to be using my palette of Turner watercolors, and specifically I'm going to be using the Cad Red, the Permanent Gamboge, and the Sap Green. I might incorporate, depends on what it looks like when I get to doing the leaves, but there might be some burnt sienna and burnt umber in the mix also. But that's all the colors I'm going to be working with, just those three colors, the Cad Red, Permanent Gamboge, and Sap Green, and maybe a little bit of the burnt sienna. I'm thinking is probably where I'm going to end up. So I'm just going to take, and the brushes I'm going to be using are Mimic by Creative Mark. They're Mimic Squirrel brushes by Creative Mark. They were highly recommended by Lindsay Wyrick, the Frugal Crafter, and she is an exceptional watercolorist. So if she said they're good, I believe her. And so far I've had really great luck with them. So I'm just going to be doing, I'm just taking this 2-inch flat wash brush, and I'm just going to be getting my paper really, really wet. And I just taped it down onto my DIY craft mat, which I will link a video to right here to show you how I made it. It's super, super cheap and works great. And then the masking tape is just stuff I got from the dollar store. Nothing fancy smancy here, man. Just nice, affordable products. Okay, and I'm going to work really, really quickly with this. This is a number 30 round, also Mimic Squirrel brush. And I'm going to be picking up some of that Permanent Gamboge. And just a nice wet wash, because I'm going right now for a muted background. So it's not going to be anything fancy, and I'm just going to be coloring in just large areas with the yellow. There's really no rhyme or reason here other than just to get some color on the paper. While it's still wet, so I've got to work pretty quickly because this paper dries really fast. So next I'm going to go in with the Cad Red. And I'm going to get some of it in the yellow. And that's coming out sort of brown, but that's okay. I'm just going to let it do its thing with the yellow. Make a little bit of orange. Gonna make a really natural orange look. And now I'm gonna take the Sap Green, kind of being careful around the red because green and red are complementary colors, so they will make mud if they mix too much. and wherever there's gaps, I'm going to go in with yellow. I also went back and blotted each painted background with paper towel to lift some of the color, because I really did want this background image to be very muted, and the paper towel gave it a little bit of texture also. Okay, so I put my leaf stamps on my large stamping block, and you can see I grouped them really tightly together. So I'm gonna move my stamps around so that I can get the paper as filled as possible with leaf stamps, like so. And I'm sorry for that glare. And then I'll stamp a section and then turn my stamp and look and see what's going to be the best way to, you know, just keep filling in so that I have a fairly complete, I think you can still see what's going on. So I'm going to go ahead and start inking up. Get these stamps inked. And I'm going to go off the paper a little bit, but that's okay, because again, I just really want to and these are cushioned rubber stamps, so they should give me a really good impression every time. Well, I say that. If I ink them properly, they should give me a good impression every time. Let me take that one stamp off. I might have it too close. I might need to move things a little bit. I got a little bit of a shadow there, but that's okay. Now, I think I already mentioned that the ink I'm using is Ranger Archival ink in the color Sepia. And I'm really glad I chose that color, because it really was the perfect color for the outline of the leaves. It went so naturally with the other colors that are being used. So again, I just continued inking and stamping all around the paper to get it as filled with leaves as possible. And it didn't need to be where there was absolutely no space between the leaves. It was fine to have space between, but just to fill in where it was kind of hard for me to do with all the stamps on one block, I did put the two smaller stamps on a smaller block to fill in areas that was harder to do with all three of them at one time. And the results really came out quite lovely. I was very satisfied with the way the overall picture looked. Okay, now we're ready to start glazing the leaves over to give them a more intense color and really make them stand out from the background. And I'm using my Turner professional watercolor paints that I bought from Jerry's Artorama, and I'm using a number 8 round Mimic Squirrel brush. Now there's 3 different methods for doing the glazing. The first one is where you just go in directly with the pigment that you want that particular area of the leaf to be, and you go directly with that pigment over that area of the leaf. And this to me was the hardest way to glaze, because I was getting hard edges between the colors. So the way we deal with that was to use just plain water and go over those edges to cause them to blend and soften out. And to make the blending easier, I mixed a little bit of the permanent gamboge with the cad red, and that was the color I'm using, by the way, is cadmium red and permanent gamboge. But anyway, it's the same colors I used in the background. So I mixed the two together to make an orange, and then you know, butted them right up next to each other, the red and the orange, to cause that soft blend, and then went over the edges with, again, just a damp brush to soften them.
And I was okay with the green and the red going up next to each other and blending a little bit, making a little bit of a brown, because that's okay. In fall leaves, you do have some brown. But this honestly was my least favorite way of doing this, because this was more of a soft, what I wanted was more of a soft blend between the colors. So the second way I tried was just to go in with just water over a couple of the leaves at a time, just working in small sections at a time, and just getting those sections wet, and then dropping in the colors that I wanted to work on that section of the leaves. So this one I did a little bit of a blend between the permanent gamboge and the sap green, and this is blending directly on the paper. And then I would move on to another couple of leaves, and again blend directly on the paper, do water over the leaf, and then blend directly on the paper the paints that I wanted to mix in that area. Now, if you notice, what I'm doing is, if you look in the background, if you see red underneath a particular section of the leaf, then what I'm doing is glazing on top in that same color. Or if there's green in the section leaf. And I figured that way it kind of gave me a more natural way of getting all the colors on each leaf, but without overthinking it and overfussing it. So I just kind of worked with the background color that was already there. Now, the third way that I glazed the leaves ended up being my favorite way, and the way that I did the majority of the leaves. So what I did was went in with a nice wet mixture of the permanent gamboge over the entire leaf. So I was still doing a wet and wet blend, but I'm starting with color and not just plain water. So I just went in with a nice wet wash of the permanent gamboge, and then again, judging by the color that's in the background against that section of the leaf, I dropped in that color over that section. So if there was green in that particular area of the background, then I put in green on top of the permanent gamboge. If it was the red that was in the background, then I went in with the cadmium red. And I found what ended up happening was I got the prettiest and most vibrant blends of color by doing this. They blended and muted together really nicely. The edges blended together really nicely between colors, and the color mixes were very vibrant and beautiful and glowy, which is what I wanted for this. Like I said, I wasn't going for hyperrealism, but I did want beautiful blends of color without, of course, making mud. And so I found that this doing a wet and wet wash with a color as my first wash, and then adding another color on top of it, helped me to achieve that beautifully soft blended look that I associate with watercolor. That's when I'm watercoloring, that's the look that I'm going for. You know, you can go for hyperrealism and fine details with different glazing methods, more specifically like the first glazing method I used. But for this type of project, this softer watercolory blend is what I was after.
Well, I sure hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial on watercoloring stamped leaves. If you recall, it's a lot like my watercoloring stamped flowers video, you know, where we do layering and glazing and so forth. So this is very similar to that, but this was a little bit looser in its style and technique, and this was really, really great practice for water control, for brush strokes, for controlling your brushes, about how much pressure to apply, how much pressure to not apply. You know, of course, trying to stay in the lines, which is not my best gift, I guess you could say. It is not my best skill. But this was really, really good watercolor practice, and it's okay if the results aren't perfect, because what we're going to do with it, it's just going to be just perfectly lovely, just the way it is, even if it's not perfect. So if you would, there's going to be an iCard right about here. I'm sorry, right about here, and I'll link to that watercoloring stamped flowers video for you. But anyway, so I hope this was a really good watercolor basics exercise, because we learned about glazing and layering and brush control, water control, and all that good stuff like I just said. And so this was some really fun techniques to try, and you don't have to have great drawing skills to be able to accomplish this, because this, you know, you have the stamped image to work with. So anyway, well, I appreciate you guys showing up for another one of my tutorials. As always, you have a very blessed day. Bye now.